Hello everybody and welcome to this video series where I'll be showing you the foundations of planet editing and how to use Planet Studio in SimpleRockets2. So Planet Studio is a tool for the design of custom celestial bodies and stellar systems. Beginning at the basics, I'll be looking at how you can start customizing and then building your own planets and planetary systems. When discussing planet editing, it's really important to remember that there are lots of different ways to do the same thing. So take these tutorials as a basic guide from which you can build up your own knowledge and techniques. I'll be covering a lot of information in each episode, so sit tight. For this first video, we'll be taking a look at the Planet Studio user interface. There's a lot that can be learned from the tooltips, so I'll encourage you to go into the studio and spend some time looking at the tips for all of the buttons and commands. There is also a help page with some basic guidelines for the use of the tools. It's worth checking that out. So the first thing that we'll be looking at is how to access the Planet Studio. Now, before we do that, I want to make it clear, no hate to mobile players, but this tutorial series is going to be based around the assumption that you're using a PC. The PC platform is far more suited to planet editing. Some of this information will of course be transferable across to mobile, but like I say, we are making the assumption here that most planet editors will be using PC. So to load the Planet Studio, we simply go into the main menu from the lobby and press Planet Studio. It's as simple as that. Now from here things begin to get a little bit more complicated. You can see we've got several options over here: create planet, load planet, create system, load system. And we're going to start off trying to just break this down, looking at how the user interface works bit by bit. So the first button that we'll look at is create planet. Now you can see here there are several different template types available. Some of these are constantly changing due to the current state of the game. At the time of recording, the game was in a beta version. So I'd highly recommend that you look through all of these templates and begin to get a feel for how celestial bodies are coded. In the next episode, we'll be looking at how to randomize the templates and make unlimited numbers of celestial bodies without having to understand how everything works. In this episode though, we'll be keeping it simple, so we'll just use one of these to examine the user interface in a bit more detail. We'll use the Lunar template for this. So after clicking create, it's prompted us to enter a name. So we'll go with test planet. So the game has now loaded the planet into the planet editing user interface. So we've arrived in this planet editing view. This is where a lot of the tutorial will be taking place. I won't be covering the navigation commands in great detail, but it is important that you get to grips with them. It's worth opening up the settings and taking a look at the key commands under Planet Studio. So you can see here under the controls there's a specific tab for Planet Studio. These can be a little bit overwhelming. There is a lot to unpack here. Normally I've found that the defaults work perfectly fine. So we aren't going to be changing anything for now. So let's have a look at some of the really basic things here. So using the plus and minus key we can change the speed of the camera movement. So using the S key to zoom out, you can see as we press plus here, you can see the speed is increasing, and as we press minus, it's decreasing. We can use the shift key then to speed up, and then let go of the shift key to be moving slower. So with the assumption that you've gone through all of these commands now and got a bit of a feel for what everything does, we'll now move on to some of the more advanced things. The first is double clicking with the mouse on a location on the planet and then being able to orbit around that location. Using the scroll wheel, we can look closer in. Then just using the left mouse button, we can move around. Right mouse button to pan. Then we can scroll all the way back out, or we could select another point and zoom in on that. In the future, we'll see how useful this is for dealing with structures, but this is a very, very useful tool which has been added quite recently, and I would definitely recommend using it. Now that we've covered most of these things, I want to go across to this right-hand box here labelled Celestial Body. The first button that you're going to see here is this refresh symbol. Now this rebuilds. It reloads the terrain to reflect the latest changes in the planet's code. It will light up blue when there are changes to implement. You saw it stayed grey because we haven't actually changed anything. What is really important to remember though, and you'll see this in the future when we begin to actually edit the planets themselves, this does not save the planet. In order to save the planet, we have to go across to here, to the Save Planet button. Rebuilding the planet will not save the changes you've made. It will only make the changes take effect on your screen. The next button right next to it is the Recenter Camera button. That's pretty self-explanatory. It just resets the camera, recenters it, so if you've got completely lost, this will bring you all the way back and reset the orientation, location, everything. So it's quite a useful command to use. The next one we can see here under the position section. We've got various different statistics, the above ground level altitude, above sea level, also the latitude and longitude location. The pencil gives the option to manually input a latitude and longitude, so let's say you wanted to go to a specific longitude, let's say 10 degrees. Typing that in and then pressing enter will bring us to exactly that location. We'll recenter the camera there back to 0 and 90. You can then copy these coordinates to the clipboard. That might seem a little bit pointless, but this can be really useful if you've got multiple locations that you want to remember. Just copying and pasting it somewhere useful or making a note of it will help. Also, there's this button here, which also has a key command assigned to it. Now this one snaps the camera to the ground. So you can see here I'm pressing the middle mouse button to move the camera around. We've been stuck down right onto the ground here. You can see above ground level 2 meters. You might be asking, well, what does this do? We'll see in a couple of minutes. This command does also have a key associated with it, which is the space bar. You can see here it's accomplished the same thing. Now, before continuing to any of the other tools, let's just have a quick discussion about the way that planets are rendered in SimpleRockets. When close to the surface, the terrain's mesh, or quad sphere, is loaded. The detail of the mesh is controlled through the terrain quality modes. But even on the lowest setting, this quad sphere is going to use a lot of memory. So you can imagine for a very big system with lots of planets, it would become a really big problem. There'd be a huge amount of memory being used. So to save on that performance, something called the scaled space sphere is used. Now the scaled space sphere is what you're looking at in the map view, or when the craft is at a large distance from the planet, and that is an image texture which is made to look like the mesh. It's possible to preview what the scaled space will look like in Planet Studio, and that is simply accomplished by turning on this scaled space button and zooming out. So you should see a subtle change in how the planet looks, and that point is where it transitions from the scaled space sphere to the quad sphere. This is used for fine-tuning the scaled space activation distance, which we can see over here by disabling the automatic transition and activation distances. It's a bit of a high-level tool, but it is something which you may find useful, being able to manually change the distance and the length of time it takes to transition from that scaled space to the quad sphere. We can also use this for adding more complex planetary details like clouds. That's a topic we'll hopefully be able to take a closer look at in the future. Another tool over in this right hand box is the Equirectangular Map, which is enabled by the switch. Now, this is an image texture, but it's important to remember that this isn't the scaled sphere that we were talking about, not the scaled space sphere we were talking about in the previous tool. This is based on the actual terrain, so if the scaled space had clouds, for example, they won't show up in this Equirectangular Map. Now, it's possible to refresh the Equirectangular Map if you've made any changes. There's also some different options, the shading, which will increase the apparent detail, the brightness, and the size. Now, you might be tempted to make this map really large so that you can see everything that's happening on the planet, and yeah, that is really useful. You just do need to remember though that the resolution of this map changes as you scale it. So if you do make it enormous, it is going to take a longer time to regenerate. When working with the terrain, it's also sometimes useful to see what the underwater visuals will look like. Now, this template that we have here doesn't have any water, but if you wanted to turn on the water sound effects and the water shading, simply enabling underwater visuals over here will do that. There are some really useful statistics in the performance section of this box. It's something which you can get a lot of really useful information from. We won't be looking at them in great detail yet though. Now, some of you may have noticed that we skipped a couple of buttons up here. I wanted to save this till last because this is one of the most useful tools found in the box, but it requires a little bit of prior knowledge. So this is the craft launching button. It's used to launch a craft directly onto the surface of the celestial body without leaving the Planet Studio. It shortcuts a lot of work, so it's a tool that you'll probably be using a lot. The first step is to select a craft. So we can see here quite a lot. We'll go with this one. Now, once the craft is selected, we'll then need to choose a launch location. Now, when I select this, you can see this option here, camera, is there. Now, this camera launch location is essentially the location at which the camera is now. So if we move slightly around the planet, let's say to over here, snap the camera to ground with either this button or with the space bar. We are now on the ground. This looks like a suitable place to launch. So we're going to go ahead and launch our camera. You can see now we've launched straight onto this planet. So this is a really useful tool. As you can see, it shortcuts just a huge amount of work that used to have to be done, making proper launch locations and everything. Just bear in mind that this is not loading you into the system that you were in before, or any system in the game. This is just a completely empty system with a star in the center and the planet that you're editing going around it. So just do bear that in mind, and obviously any flights which you do in this mode won't be saved. By clicking End Flight, you get this different dialog to what you would get in a standard sandbox. You can either relaunch or exit. And as you can see in just a moment, pressing exit will return us all the way back to the Planet Studio where we were before. We'll be returning to the planet editing tools in the next episode, so for now we'll move over to the system editor. A lot of the commands found within this system editor are very intuitive, so we'll go quite quickly over this section of the tutorial. We access this through either create system or load system. Now I'm going to load a system here. So you can see here we've been put into the system editor view. Over here on the left hand panel we've got the metadata under the system properties. This gives the system's name, the version tag. You can see here the work in progress ESS 4.0 release with the tag next generation. Maximum zoom and map scale. These are really things that the tooltips give plenty of information on, and they're quite fun to play around with. You can also see here any launch locations that are present, and you can also see this really useful view which shows all the different bodies in the system, their current version, whether they are off the website or if they're local files. This is very useful when you want to upload a system, because you'll need to make sure that all of these planets and celestial bodies have this blue cloud symbol next to them to show that they have been uploaded. Another couple of tools here under the system properties, jumping back up a couple of buttons, are tear time and zero time. They're pretty self-explanatory, but also this interesting one called validate orbits. Now I'm not going to click that right now because there's quite a lot of celestial bodies in this system, and I know that all of the orbits have been validated. But the purpose of this is to highlight if there's any conflict which will occur in the orbits. Now this is run by default when the system is uploaded to the website, so if there are any conflicts it will actually fail and won't let you share your system. So you need to run this before you upload to really make sure that there's no problems. Typical problem areas would be moons whose sphere of influence intersects its parent planet or other moons, or two planets or moons that are on collision courses. So we'll zoom out a little bit so we've got a clearer view of how systems look like. It's really very much like the standard map view. Each of these different things can be selected, except that there is also the additional information of the sphere of influence, which is this green circle surrounding everything. Now across on the right, this is where most of your work will be taking place. You can see there's several different tools here. This one edits the planet, so this will take you right across back into the planet editing view and load up the planet there ready for you to edit. This one will replace the planet. By clicking this you can see we get this list of celestial bodies which are currently on my system. Now one important thing to note with this is that there can't be two versions or two instances of the same body in one system, so do be careful when replacing planets. If you do have trouble with replacing a planet due to this, let's say for example I had a replacement Drew and it was called Drew, the game would throw up an error if I tried to replace it. The best way to get around this is to replace Drew, in this case, with a temporary placeholder, any planet that you like, and then in turn replace that with the new Drew, in this case, that you want to use. It's a little bit hacky, but it gets around the problem and it seems to work fine. There is also add a child planet. So for example, in this case, we've got Drew selected. So if we were to press this plus, we would generate a moon of Drew. If we were to zoom out and select Juno, the central star, and press that plus symbol, we would generate a planet which will be orbiting Juno. So it's all pretty intuitive. It's also possible to set custom colours on the orbit lines. So you can see in this case, this planet, Pollux in this case, has been given a custom orbit line colour to make it fit with the overall theme of what the planet looks like. This is easily changed using the colour palette. Sometimes the actual colour that you get and the colour which is in these boxes can come across quite different, so just keep an eye out for that. There are also all of the orbital parameters. I'm not going to explain all of these here. If you want to, looking at the Wikipedia page on orbital mechanics and whatnot will probably give you enough information that you need. The sphere of influence controls this green sphere that you can see around each celestial body. You can set it to be the default, or you can tweak it upwards and downwards a little bit. You can also alter the initial rotation angle and the length of the day in hours, or this really useful tool which has just been added in the latest beta, which tidally locks the body to its parent. Also the standard tools of being able to disable and enable visualization. So I hope that this has been helpful and that we've been able to cover all of the main UI elements in both the Planet Editor and System Editor views of the Planet Studio. This is all that we'll be covering in the first tutorial episode. In the next video we'll be looking in more detail at the Celestial Body Designer and getting to grips with some basic planetary editing. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed.